This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey joined alongside Brian Tripp. Tripp, we have made it. This is a week we have circled on our calendars for months. And now we are finally here, a few days away from week 7 getting going here. And I never thought I'd ask you this question, but this is where we have to start. We have Howard Griffith coming on here to get ourselves ready to go for a big week 7. Obviously, we'll give you picks, not just for Ohio State and Oregon and Penn State-USC, but all of the conference games as well, 7 of them here in week number 7. But I got to start here, Tripp, with all the drama, chaos, excitement we saw in week number 6 last week across college football. Are we going to see that same excitement and craziness here in week number 7?
I don't know if we'll see the same zaniness, but what we'll figure out is who truly is the team to beat or the teams to beat in the Big Ten this weekend, right? Ohio State going on the road to Autzen. You know, one thing I think we take for granted as Big Ten fans, you know how difficult it is to play in Happy Valley. You know how difficult it is to play at the Horseshoe in Columbus. You know how difficult it is to go to Iowa City and play at Iowa. Autzen, to see Ohio State go into Autzen and get a real feel for that atmosphere for the first time. And again, you have the cross-country trip elements for both Ohio State and Penn State. Those are real factors in the new era of college football. And that's not just applying in the Big Ten. Look at Miami on the road at Cal last weekend in a game in which they were favored and, you know what, heavily favored. Look how that cross-country travel is going to impact games. I know I gave the stat on the podcast on Monday, but there's some real things that we're also going to learn about the landscape and the magnitude of that moving forward. Not that anyone cares, right? All that matters is you got a big game on the road for Ohio State, Penn State, and a huge game at home for Oregon. So I think it might not be as crazy and unpredictable as last weekend, but in terms of what that college football playoff looks like at the end of the year and what that Big Ten championship game looks like in Indianapolis, this is as big a weekend as you're going to have. And as a college football fan, these are the matchups you can't wait to see.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Can't wait for it here. So let's dive into it. Let's start with Oregon, Ohio State. Number 2 Buckeyes, like you said, on the road at number 3 Oregon. First ever top 5 matchup at Autzen Stadium. So that atmosphere you're just talking about should be juice, ready to go, 4:30 local kick. It should be a great, great atmosphere for this game. Let me ask you this, Tripp. Is there a team you look at when it comes to pressure that maybe needs to win this game more than the other?
No, I don't think so. I think this is a matchup that establishes one of these teams as the Big Ten front runner. And again, that also coincides with what happens down in Los Angeles with Penn State visiting USC. But Ohio State and Oregon both have the opportunity for quality wins the rest of the way. There is no doubt that these are 2 of the top 5 to 10 rosters in all of college football. And if both teams stay healthy, ultimately, this is a game that just establishes one of these teams as the front runner in the league and positions one of those teams for the college football playoff bye. But I do not think it is a must win or a game that either team needs more. And some people are going to listen to that and say, well, that's the problem with the 12-team playoff. Now you are diminishing the value of this game. No, it still has significant value. A conference championship, a bye in a college football playoff. Your margin, both of these teams, the schedule sets up favorably because most of their big games the rest of the way are at home. But you have the margin for error then the rest of the season. The team that loses this game, it's college football. We just saw Vanderbilt defeat Alabama last weekend. Of all things, the team that loses this game no longer has that margin for error. So it is still significant. But yes, no team has the pressure to win it more, in my opinion.
The bye, you're 100% right about, because that is a real thing. Like playing one less playoff game, which is one less opportunity for you to lose and have your season end, is massive. And the winner of this game is absolutely in the driver's seat to be in position to go to the Big Ten title game and win the conference to get that first round bye, which is massive. Ask any coach. They would much rather have a bye than have to play a round 1 playoff game, even if it's at home. But
something to add there too, Ryan, is when you look at the length when you look at the length of the college football season today, right? Starts the last weekend of August. And because if you're a playoff team that has national championship aspirations, you could be playing a conference championship game, is game 13. If you have to play then the first round playoff, 14, 15, 16, like those games add up. And the depth of a team is really, really important. Having an extra bye, having an extra week off could be the difference between winning a national championship and not winning a national championship. Not because the threat of losing the game, but because of the wear and tear on the bodies that college football teams are not accustomed to having, like an NFL team. And even look at the NFL. It's a war of attrition. Who's left standing at the end of the season? But these players have never played a 14, 15, 16 game schedule. In the NFL, they do it every year. But that has never happened in college football before, and you're not going to have that sustained buildup. I think that bye is so incredibly important at the end of the year.
I agree. But one thing when it comes to pressure, I'm curious your thoughts because we look at Ohio State and obviously they had all the hype going into this season.
Yep.
Everybody's coming back, crushed the transfer portal. It's national title or bust here. And when you look at margin for error, and this is really Ohio State's first chance here, I do think there is pressure just because there's like you look at Ohio State, I would say more than any team has pressure to win a national title this year. If your first opportunity, granted, on the road against the number 3 team in the country, your season is far from over if you lose this game, especially if it's close. But I think I'm curious to see here for the Buckeyes. To me, it does feel like maybe the walls start to close in a little bit. You start to feel that pressure of the weighted expectations if you lose this game to Oregon, and then you have a trip to Happy Valley here coming in a few weeks or so. Even if worst case scenario, Ohio State loses to Oregon, loses to Penn State, they're still in the college football playoff. So there's no threat of them missing out on the playoff. But like you said, that road now gets harder for the Buckeyes to where maybe you go from national title expectations and assuming you'll be in the Big Ten title game to first round of the playoffs on the road, potentially, depending on how the seeding breaks out here. It does feel like Ohio State, I think, needs this win more just because the expectations going to the season are so heavy that if you fall in your big first test with another one here in a few weeks, it does feel like you can kind of start to crumble under those expectations.
I think the difference here, and it's not crumbling under expectations, but it would start to ignite the noise around the program again that Ryan Day has encountered the last 3, 4, 5 seasons when all of a sudden you're losing to Michigan, a series that you had dominated. All of a sudden, yeah, you might make the playoffs or make a Big Ten, but you're not winning those playoff games, right? I think that would then ignite the chatter and the outside noise around the program again. While it may not shape their 2024 season, it then would once again bring those questions back into the spotlight. And that has been the one knock on Ohio State and their fan base, which wants to win a national championship, and deservedly so, right? They have the talent to do it. That has been the criticism of Ohio State the last couple of seasons, and a loss, granted, right? Like at number 3, okay, you can live with it, but it would at least start those conversations again.
And you look at last year against Notre Dame, a game in which they won on the road, but you saw how emotional Ryan Day was, which is, I mean, I still love it, calling out Lou Holtz. Where the hell is Lou Holtz at? But in that moment, right, you can almost kind of feel like not only this sense of relief, but like he clearly hears the noise, right? He clearly hears what is said about his program. And like you said, you lose this game to Oregon, your season is far from over, but all you're doing is waking up right now those critics that have been sleeping because you're not played anyone so far. And it's like, oh, Ohio State can beat Iowa. Who cares? But now when they play a big game, you can't trust them. You wake some of those guys up and it just makes it harder.
That's unfair because they did play Iowa last weekend. And anytime you play a team that has a top 10 defense annually, like Iowa's a good team. At what point does being a top 5 team, like, are people still saying Penn State hasn't played anyone because they played Illinois at home? Like, at what point do we start to respect those middle tier teams in a conference that has proven to be a little bit deeper than anticipated? Can you only say a team has played someone when they've played a top 10, top 15 team? Like, I think that is unfair to teams in college football, especially when you had a weekend like you just had. winning is hard. Winning is hard, and I'm kind of tired of hearing the they haven't played anyone argument because yeah, they're going to play better opponents down the stretch. But the reason the reasonable expectations on a team are really unfair to a top 5, top 10 team saying, "Oh, they haven't played anyone." And them only being measured by their success in that one or two games against. Like there's something to programs who routinely beat everyone they're supposed to and beat them handily. And Ohio State has done that. So I don't think they're completely unproven because they have done that. They have done that. And I think that's a knock that Oregon has had this year, but they have won every one of their games. It hasn't looked great at times, but they've won every one of their games. It's been a knock on Penn State, but they've won every one of their games and they are beating teams that they are supposed to beat. At what point do we start to give credit to those teams, especially after a weekend like you just saw in college football, where teams who were heavily favored to win games did not win those games? Are you still saying Alabama? I know they beat Georgia, but Alabama, if Georgia wasn't on their schedule, they hadn't played anyone, but they lost to Vanderbilt. Well, I guess Vanderbilt, all of a sudden, are they still a nobody? I'm kind of like tired of hearing that argument.
I think it's just the reality of college football. I think it's the reality of college football for teams at the top: Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. I think that's what you sign up for. Honestly, when you agree to coach these teams, you are not judged by beating Michigan State, Iowa, Indiana. I'm not saying it's fair, but that's just the reality. You are judged by Michigan and how you play in the playoff. I mean, Ryan Day is 56-8. I'm a big Ryan Day fan. Every loss he has is to a ranked opponent. He has literally beaten every single unranked team that you should take care of business. He has no Vanderbilt losses on his resume. Yet, what does every Ohio State fan and even national media pundit say? Ryan Day can't win the big game. We got to give it up. Got to fire him. Can't beat Michigan. Can't beat Georgia in a game in which Georgia is beating everybody, and you lose on a field goal that just missed. Maybe not just missed, but you get my point. They had a field goal to win the game. Like, it's one of those things. I think we could – fairness and reality, I think in this specific conversation with these schools here at the top, I think it's two different conversations. I would agree it's not fair, but I think it's reality. And I'm not even saying Ryan Day should be criticized if Ohio State loses this game to Oregon on the road at number 3. But what I am saying is, like, you talk with those critics, and we saw his reactions last year. He hears the critics. Ohio State hears the criticism of when they play big games and can't win. That's why I think, going back to at least the initial question here, I think Ohio State has pressure on them, way more pressure than Oregon, because like if Oregon loses this game and they lose by 3 or 7, whatever, I don't know about you, I feel like Oregon would get praised. They played close. They played really tough against Ohio State. They could be right there. They prove something. But if it's the other way around, if Oregon wins by 7, it's, Ohio State. How can you trust them? These frauds, again, they're not going to go anywhere. I think that's why I think there's more pressure, because I think that's the reality. Like, that's what the conversation will be on Sunday morning.
Let's take it one step further. Outside of program, right now, all of a sudden, Dan Lanning started to become that same conversation because they lost both games against Washington last year. Which coach needs it more? Which coach do you trust more?
Ooh, I think it's two different conversations. I actually trust Ryan Day more in this game. I do. I think Ryan Day, again, has been unfairly criticized, and I have no doubts about his ability to win a big game. I know he's not calling the plays, but to get the offense set up to win a big game. I trust him more, but like I just said, I think he also needs it more. I think he needs to fend off everyone coming after him, where I think Dan Lanning, if you win, it's honestly gravy at this point.
I agree with you on Ryan Day. I think he is unfairly criticized but it's Ohio State. You're expected to beat Michigan. You need to beat Michigan. You really are measured by that game. But I agree. I think Ryan Day has been unfairly criticized during his time at Ohio State. Can we actually talk about the game? I mean,
Let's
this
do
is
it.
all great, and I guess but what ultimately decides this matchup? Like, you go up and down, Ohio State, quarterback, check. Run game, check. Passing game, check. So far, offensive line, which was a question mark coming into the year, big check. Defense, all 3 levels with star playmakers, whether it's Downs or JT on the D line, check, check, check. Man, they check all of the boxes, Ohio State. But then you start doing the same thing with Oregon, And while they may have started slow because of injuries and a reshuffled offensive line, Dylan Gabriel has turned the ball, but Will Howard has occasionally as well. But you start going Oregon, and they check all of those boxes too. And they have been proved every single week. It is so hard to find where the margin is in this game and what matchup decides the game. Usually, when you go into a big game, and again, I don't want to jump ahead, but like you can point to Penn State's defensive line versus USC's offensive line as a key deciding factor in that game, right? I'm having trouble finding what is the decider in this game besides which team's best players ultimately are better than the other team's best players.
Obviously, you need Dylan Gabriel if you're Oregon to play really well. And I think same thing we've said about Will Howard and Ohio State. Here's at least what I'll look at, and I'm curious then to kind of hear your thoughts about this. I think this game is decided Oregon defensive line, Ohio State offensive line, specifically in the run game. Because if Oregon can't slow down the two-headed monster, and they are an absolute monster, of Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, I think they have no chance. I think they have no chance in this game, to be honest with you, because if you are allowing this run game to get going here, both average over 8 yards per carry. They've been one of the best rush offenses, in all of the country. If you are taking the pressure off of Will Howard now, and now he's not facing a 3rd and 7, but instead a 3rd and 2, and all of a sudden now you're selling out to stop the run because you can't stop it, and now you got Jeremiah Smith one-on-one, Emeka Buka one-on-one. Will Howard's going to feast, and that's going to be easy. If Oregon can't stop the run here, and at least put up a fight, I don't know how they win this game. We saw it. The only other elite rushing attack they faced, and this was a one-man wrecking crew, was Ashton Jeanty, Boise State, a few weeks ago. And we saw him go for 192 and 3 touchdowns. Oregon won the game, but had a really tough time slowing down one elite running back. With how much talent Ohio State has offensively outside of just the run game of themselves, if you allow Ohio State to get whatever they want in the run game, which I think will open up the passing game, I think we're talking about a Buckeyes win here pretty convincingly.
I think Oregon's run game is also really, really important in this game. If you look at the 2 Big Ten games they've played, 183 yards rushing per game. Jordan James has gotten going for them, 269 rush yards, 2 touchdowns in Big Ten games. Interesting stat I saw, and it was on CBS. Oregon had 20% of their runs in non-conference stopped for a loss. Meanwhile, it's only 8% in conference. We know what Ohio State's outstanding rushing defense just did to Caleb Johnson from Iowa, holding him to 86 yards. But if Oregon also can take some pressure off of Dylan Gabriel by running the ball the way they have, and like it's cliche because these are 2 teams that have the ability to be really explosive. Both teams have the ability to have their quarterback involved in that running game as well. But I think Oregon needs to shorten the game a little bit. They need to be great in the red zone where they weren't the last couple of weeks in Big Ten. Gabriel's thrown interceptions, and Ohio State has, right? If you start to look at that margin, who's getting touchdowns, turnovers, but also if you can shorten the game and sustain drives, as cliche as it is, Ohio State's Ohio State's run game not only is good, but it can be really explosive. Ohio State's you cannot give Ohio State more possessions, more touches, because they're going to create explosive plays. And it sounds so darn cliche, but turnovers, limiting explosive plays, and converting on 3rd downs ultimately decides the game. It is such a cliche thing to say, but when both teams are so evenly matched at every level and every position, those are the deciding factors. And Oregon having balance offensively and slowing the game down and shortening the game is a real thing here to limit the explosive ability of Ohio State's offense.
Take away special teams. When you look at Ohio State offense, Ohio State defense, Oregon offense, Oregon defense, who is the worst of the 4 units?
Wow, that's a really challenging question. I would say Oregon's defense, maybe.
I would agree. And that's why I'm with you. Like when it comes to Oregon's run game, like Ohio State, I think like Oregon has to protect their defense, I think most. Like if you're Ohio State with how balanced your offense and your defense is, you can trust your defense, even if they're on the field for long drives, to still sustain and bend but don't break. I think I would get very nervous if I was an Oregon fan here. If you're seeing Oregon's offense either have quick drives or you're 3 and out, 1 first down and out, and you're putting that defense back on the field and they're on the field for 35, 37, dare I say 40 minutes, I think you're in trouble here. And so I'm with you. Like, I think run game, and like you said, it's coincided perfectly timing-wise with Jordan James the last 2 games in the Big Ten really kind of getting going here, really lifting up, I think also coincidentally as well, or not a coincidence is I think the right way to say it. The offensive line has gotten healthier. So the offensive line's gotten healthier. The run game is improved. You are going to need that balance. There's no doubt about the explosiveness of Oregon's offense. Dylan Gabriel has shown you, even when everybody knows they're passing, his talent, the receiver talent, they can still make plays. But balance just to help give your defense a breather here and not have it one-sided where your defense is always on the field, I think is huge. And the other thing, red zone. Red zone is huge. I'm glad you brought up the red zone because for both sides here, who can hold the other team to 3? Who can hold the other team out of the end zone? Because I think both teams will be able to move the ball between the 20s. But you look at Ohio State, this is insane. They've made 21 trips to the red zone so far this season. They've scored on all 21. But 20 out of the 21 scores have been touchdowns. When they get in the red zone, they're not settling for 3. On the flip side, Oregon's defense, 68th in the country when it comes to red zone defense. That is going to be a huge key here for Dan Lanning, for that entire defense. Look, Ohio State's going to get yards. It's imperative here to keep them out of the end zone. That could be a big mismatch here when you look at how elite Ohio State is at converting those red zone trips to touchdowns and how Oregon has struggled right now when the opponents get in the red zone, keeping them out of the end zone.
It's one of those where you have to nitpick everything to try to find the difference. And ultimately, we can continue this discussion all day, but it's which big time guys are going to make big time plays. And is it Howard? Is it Gabriel? Right. I think both teams, you want to keep those quarterbacks in the pocket. Don't let them make plays with their legs.
Right.
Make them beat you throwing the football. Don't let them extend plays and create the big plays downfield. But which team's stars? And I tend to lean towards Ohio State here because of what we've seen from Smith and Igbuka, the running backs, and then the defensive side, Downs, JT, Jack Sawyer, Mitchell Mel. Like, I tend to think Ohio State stars are a little bit better than Oregon's stars, even though Oregon's receiving core, like they're good. But that's why I think even though on the road, I think Ohio State can go into a really, really tough environment at Autzen and win the game because I think their star power is a little bit better than Oregon's star power ultimately. And Ohio State's star power on offense, Oregon doesn't have as much of an answer for it. Jordan Birch has been playing unbelievable, but I don't think they have as much of an answer for it defensively as Ohio State probably matches up a little bit better with Oregon's star power on offense. Like that truly could be it, is which of the best players in this game make the best plays.
So when we do return here on the Still Enrolled podcast, Howard Griffith, Big Ten Network, tremendous analyst. We'll break down this matchup, Penn State-USC, and go around the conference as well. Howard Griffith, next. And welcome back into the Still Enrolled podcast. Of course, Brian Tripp and Ryan Hickey alongside you here. Let's welcome on Big Ten royalty, one of the best analysts they have on the Big Ten Network. It is Howard Griffith. Howard, welcome to the pod. Thanks so much for the time.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. How you guys doing today?
Great. We are doing great here as we get set for the biggest weekend so far in college football. Penn State-USC. Obviously, we'll get to the matchup here in a little bit, but the big one. First ever top 5 matchup at Autzen Stadium. Number 2, Ohio State. Number 3, Oregon. This was a game, Howard, right? We circled long before the season started. Now we're finally here. Now that we've gotten 5 games, under the belt here for both Oregon and Ohio State, I'm curious, has anything changed perception-wise with either of these teams based on what you thought about them in the preseason versus now where we are finally here in week number 7?
Well, I think let's start with Oregon, and I think they probably started off not as well as they would have liked. They were having some struggles up front, particularly on their offensive line, but come after week three, they really started to get things kind of settled down and started to become that team that we thought they were, starting to have some of those explosive plays down the field. The running game was really working. Gabriel, although he had some struggles last week, I think is still one of the best quarterbacks that are out there. So I think when you look at Oregon, that's a physical football team. They know what they want to do. They're good on defense. And when you start looking at this matchup, you flip to the other side, talk about Ohio State. What I've really been impressed with them this year is just how locked in they've been. I think one thing you can look at those veterans, their best players on their team are the ones that are also working the hardest. I've been talking about for the last week or so about playing without the football, and that's on the offensive side whether you have receivers blocking downfield, running backs picking up the blitz, and willing to do some things that, as superstars, they really don't have to do really. But when you have a team that's competing and trying to be the best that they can be, when your best players are out there playing at a high level, that really, really elevates the entire roster. And I think both of these programs are trying to develop their roster as deep as they can, because we can make the assumption that if they keep on the pace that they're on right now, they'll both be in the college football playoffs, the 12-team playoffs, and that's going to be a long process. So you have to have an established roster beyond your too deep of guys that you're able to roll through when you start thinking about corners and safeties, defensive linemen.
Howard, we'll get into keys to this matchup, but when you look at the two teams, obviously high-level quarterback play, skill position, Ohio State's loaded, so is Oregon. Like up and down the roster, what differentiates these two, if anything, and are these truly, do you think, two of the best teams in college football? Obviously.
Yeah, I think when you look at the rosters, I think if you go with the star ratings, you're probably maybe Oregon has one or two players that may be higher rated overall, just numbers wise. But these are two really elite rosters. And I think you look at their top 22, it's hard to argue with what Ohio State has. And I think one of the things that will also be talked about this week is just how many NFL scouts will be in attendance just to watch this matchup and seeing these potential NFL players playing against some of the best competition out there. I think it's a thin margin that's going to separate these two teams at this particular point. It's about, as we talk about, paying attention to details, being locked in, to the game plan that's got to take place. But I really like both of these teams and where they're playing right now, that they're doing a really good job on both sides of the ball. And really, I know we'll get into the keys, but I think a big part of this always in these types of games is what's going to happen in special teams. You never know. There's going to be a fake something. So you have to be prepared in that area as well.
You talk about a thin margin, Howard. Is there one area specifically you're looking at that you maybe think could favor one side or the other that is the difference here?
I think a player that I've really liked for a long time, Sonny Styles, is now moving. He's playing the outside linebacker position. It's one of those hybrid positions where, he's talented enough to be able to cover the tight ends, probably can cover some slot receivers, but that gives them a little bit of flexibility when Oregon decides they want to go 3 and 4 wide receivers, or they want to start to mix up their personnel groups, that they can keep him on the field at times and not really be at a disadvantage. So I think he's going to be a big part of what they're trying to do. And he's getting more and more comfortable with what they're asking him to do. I go back almost 2 years ago, I think, when he first had an opportunity to be out there. And he was, just a second late on getting an interception. And they ended up going for a touchdown. But he's now moved to that outside linebacker position. And it's a loaded group. They just have so many guys that they can just run at you at waves of guys, whether it's linebackers or defensive ends. That's going to be a big part of it. But make no doubt about it, this Oregon team, that offensive line they have, like I said, are playing at a high level right now, and they'll be up for the challenge versus that talented defense that Ohio State has.
A lot has been made about Ohio State's schedule to this point. Obviously, took down Iowa 35-7 last week. Oregon's defensive line versus Ohio State's offensive line, right? Coming into the year, Ohio State's offensive line was the question. Now they really get a test against the defensive line that played really well against Michigan State and has Jordan Burch out there.
Yeah, it's funny. Chip Kelly is on record saying, right, he was asked, hey, what about this offensive line? This seems to be, a problem area for Ohio State, the right side in particular. And Chip Kelly, who's seen a lot of football, says, well, if they're a problem, that's okay with me. I'll take them because I like this group, right? And this is really what happens when you get to a certain point, that level where you're competing for a championship each and every year. At least that's the expectation. We're going to nitpick you, right? That's going to go on. And when you look at this offensive line for Ohio, they're really athletic. They're a really athletic group that can get up to the second level, really shifty, can pull, can do a lot of different things. But they're going to be challenged. This is going to be a huge challenge for them. And I only do this, right? And I think, Penn State has an advantage in this area as well. When you have elite defensive players on the defensive line or linebackers, you're practicing against these guys each and every day. So although your competition that you're playing against may not have those future first-round draft picks or high NFL draft picks on their roster or on their defensive line, you're getting that constant work and have been getting it since the spring. And that's one of the things when you take a look at Ohio State in the spring, it was tough for those guys to move the football. And it was because of all the talent that they have on defense. So they get into games, it seems to be a little bit easier for them. But I'm not as concerned about it. They have to play the schedule that they have to deal with. But it's definitely going to be a challenge. And like I said, these NFL scouts, those are some of the matchups that they want to see. This is offensive line against the defensive line, really elite players on both sides of the ball.
Speaking of that side of the ball, Howard, if you're Tosh Lapoy, Oregon's defense coordinator, do you just say, you know what, this has been a great rushing team. We're going to sell it to stop the run here and take our chance that Jeremiah Smith may pull out down another one-handed catch and just beat us that way? Like, how do you try to slow down this Ohio State offense if you are Oregon's defense?
Let's be clear. Jeremiah Smith's going to catch whatever he wants to catch anytime he wants to. Real quickly on him, I came back after watching those guys in the spring, and I was telling people, I said, this kid right now could easily be the third receiver on any NFL football team right now.
Wow.
And I think he's proven that he probably could be a little higher than that on some franchises. But you have to make a decision. And that's what's really been so fun to watch about this Ohio State team this year with Chip Kelly. They'll go two tights on you. They'll go two tights, two backs. They'll go jumbo. They'll spread you out. You have to try to pick your poison and try to, put your best defense out there that can be a catch-all, because personnel groups are going to be flying through. So you almost have to have some defensive calls that are going to be catch-alls, and that you're not going to just get beat deep on plays. Ohio State's going to make a lot of plays in this game, and I think if you're Oregon's defense, you know that's going to happen. But you have to limit the explosive plays. You have to eliminate some of those big plays that are going to go down the field. Those are the things you can't give up. You got to be able to keep everything in front of you. But this is, the cliche is you always have to make a team one-dimensional. I don't know at this point that you can make Ohio State one-dimensional just because of what they have the ability to do personnel-wise. And Chip Kelly's put so many different personnel groups on the field to this point that it's going to be difficult. And I think it's one of those things where they're going to have to make changes and adjustments on the fly in the game. You talk about being able to use tablets, being able to use helmet communication. All of that stuff is going to be at a premium for both sides of the ball this week.
Howard, as we dive into keys, one thing you can do, though, is create turnovers. And Will Howard has thrown an interception in 3 straight games. Everyone knows, going back to his days at Kansas State, he's had propensity to turn the football over. What can Oregon do, as we talk about some of our keys, and that is creating turnovers? What can they do to create that against that Ohio State offense?
You have to, I think pre-snap is going to be huge. I think we'll see Ohio State try to put people in motion, their receivers, their slot receivers, backs, whatever it may be, to try to get a gauge of whether they're playing man or zone. And then I think it's about forcing, Will Howard's eyes to ultimately lie to him, right? See one thing, but be playing something different. But the cautionary tale in that is you have to make sure that, from a defensive standpoint, that there's a communication that's going on, because you can get too cute, too fancy, and all of a sudden the call doesn't get to everyone, and one guy's playing zone when everybody else is playing man, and you can have some of those issues. But I think pre-snap is going to be a big part of it, and really put him in a situation where he's unsure, because it only takes a split second, as you guys know, to really be late on delivering a football to the wide side of the field where a corner is sitting on a route and he's able to jump it. So, he's had some issues when you've been able to get pressure on him. So I think applying pressure, mixing up your coverages, and ultimately, there's going to be some plays in this game. There are like 5 plays in every game that can really change the sway of which way the game goes, and they're going to have to be able to make more than those 5, right? You're going to have to be able to take advantage of at least 3, 4, 5 of those to be able to get this offense off schedule.
On the other side of the ball, however, when you look at Oregon's offense, it's been a little weird recently here because their run game is ticked up in conference. Jordan James has ran the ball really well. But as they're running the ball better, their offensive line's getting healthier. Dylan Gabriel's all of a sudden started to struggle a little bit more in the pass game here. It's been a little confounding. What do you expect from Oregon's offense going to this game?
I expect them to be at their very best, but the same thing. Ohio State will play man to man, and they feel good about it with their strong edge rushers. They can do that and feel like they'll match up to it. But again, it's quarterbacks never want to see pressure in their face. They don't want to be able to see that. I think you may see Gabriel on the move a little bit more so that they can move the pocket. They can get him outside of it and try to slow down some of the pass rush that's going to be coming at them. But he can't afford to turn this ball over. And you would think that he'll be playing at home, so he should have a better opportunity and not be rattled as much. But this game is going to come down. It's going to be on the quarterbacks. He's going to have to make some big plays in this, because if you look at their offense, you probably would give the edge to Ohio State defense the way they're playing at this point. So I think making them one-dimensional, like we always talk about, is going to be key. But he's going to have to make some of those big throws, whether it's third and 4, third and long. At some point, there are going to be some times where his experience as a quarterback is going to have to take over and be able to keep them on the field. I think the team that's able to control the line of scrimmage and the time of possession ultimately is going to be the team that's going to be able to pull out the victory.
Howard, we could talk about this matchup all day long, but the other team that's been mentioned with Ohio State and Oregon all year is Penn State, and they have a big challenge on the road at USC. I know USC has lost a couple of conference road games, but where does Penn State stack up, in your opinion, with what you've seen so far compared to these two teams?
Yeah, I think they're right there, and one of the big reasons I think they're maybe just a tick below. I mean, you could talk about rosters and that sort of thing, but I think that's probably where they are. And they're getting comfortable on both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively. Tom Allen, as you guys know, is back up in the booth and is kind of has an opportunity to see the game from a different perspective than he's accustomed to being able to see it. And I think you look at Abdul Carter, I think he's going to continue to get more comfortable with being able to be on the left side, the right side, over the center, back at his linebacker position. He is a true difference maker when he can move around, when they can move those pieces around. So I like where Penn State is. You look at them offensively, you're talking about being creative. It takes me back to watching Penn State right now offensively, kind of takes me back to my days at Denver, when every week there was a new wrinkle put in. It just wasn't the same offense every week. Yeah, you had your base stuff, but there was always some new wrinkles that were put in, and we've seen it. Whether there's an extension of from the gap between the right guard and the left tackle is enormous sometimes. Whether you're pulling a tackle and asking him to either kick out or do a wrap block to go up to the next level, it has been fun to watch that offense really elevate, and I think that's what you want to see out of this team. And Drew Aller, we know what type of talent he has and ability he has, but now that they've allowed him to really get out and run as well when he needs to. Don't do it all the time.
Yeah.
You don't need to get him hurt, but he's one of those players that I think can continue to be a difference maker, and they're continuing to make those plays in the pass game that they need to. So the growth of Penn State to me this year has been really good. And you talk about having to go on the road. Well, they've been on the road. They've been in some hostile environments this year already, so they know what to expect. And sometimes, we talk about teams being able to go on the road. This is probably a great time for them, to go on the road playing against a team like SC that's reeling a little bit from where I think we all saw them after we saw them beat LSU. Right now, we're starting to see some things on the defensive side where, they're not tackling as well as they need to, which kind of takes you back to some of the things we saw last year. Whether that's travel, I don't know, but they should be at home. They're at home, so you would expect them to really be dialed in and pay attention to detail, because in a lot of ways, this is a pivotal game for them, because they stumbled a couple of times already this year, so they need to really secure a victory in this one and be on top, have their best game plan ready to go if they want to continue to try to make a push for the 12-team playoff.
We obviously have a big contingent of Penn State fans that listen to our podcast. Get USC's offensive line against Denai Dennis Sutton, Abdul Carter, Zane Durant. Do they have a chance? Is that the key matchup in the whole game? If Penn State can dominate on the D line, they've got this, right?
Yeah, Zane Durant, to me, man, he is so. I wouldn't say not obviously with the Penn State fan base, but I think when you look nationally and you start talking about players, defensive players, particularly interior players, this dude, man, he is, and he's been like this since his freshman year. Because when I first saw him as a freshman, I'm like, what in the world? I mean, he really gets after it. And as he's continued to grow in his strength, I think now we're starting to really see him blossom into the player that I thought I saw back then when he was a true freshman. And he's really, really taking care of his business. But yeah, I like him. I like this defense. I'm telling you, that is a huge matchup to be able to get these guys up front to run around, be able to create some havoc, and have some, come up with some turnovers on the back end. Miller Moss, I mean, he's as tough as they get too. I mean, he's had some struggles. He's been beat up a little bit as far as taking some hits, but he's going to step right back in there, and he's not going anywhere. And I like the way he plays the game. And this is a young offense as well. When you look at the skill position guys, but they have to really be able to keep everything in front of them, not give up the explosive plays, because this is an offense that they can hit you and they can hit you quick. So keeping everything in front is going to be a big part of this game as well.
I want to take a step back, Howard, since you know the conference inside and out. And obviously, we've talked a lot about Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, rightfully so. Not only have they been three of the best teams in the country, but also obviously, big games here as well. But when you look back and look at some other teams here, you're Fighting Illini, Indiana, Rutgers, even Washington now as a newcomer getting a nice win over Michigan last week. How impressed have you been so far with the depth of the conference, not just at the top so far, but really in the middle?
Really impressed. You look at, and even let's throw Minnesota into that mix a little bit. They're a field goal away from some things being a little bit different. You mentioned Washington, who we saw them. This is going to be a good football team. They're a tough football team. Some things didn't go their way in a couple of games that they've lost, but then you look at Indiana, and Indiana really is a fascinating case study to me. As athletic departments that may want to make a change, or they continue to put their short list together. You look at Cinetti and you say, okay, he's a 63-year-old guy who's just now getting his big shot on a bigger stage, right? And he was able to have all the success in his previous stops. Then he brings these players with him, a part of the program, and those players, his portal guys, have ultimately become the leaders of this football team. And normally athletic departments are always looking for that next young hot shot that's looking around. And I think this is an interesting, like I said, this will continue to be an interesting case study can you go out and find a coach that's had the success that he wants, as is needed and wanted on a lower level, and then bring him up. And what he's done to energize that program has been remarkable. And it really started, right, when he started talking about Purdue, and then what he had to say about Ohio State, and what he talked about Googling him. And quite frankly, the truth is, I think he rubbed a lot of people outside of Indiana the wrong way. But there was a method to his madness. And when you sit down and you talk with him about it, and just about what his vision is, you get a different perspective of who he is as not only a head coach, but also as one of those guys that can really lead a program. So it's been fun. It's been fun to watch, and they're playing really well. And he'll tell you each week, they're stepping up in competition, and they'll have to do it again. But it's a fun story to watch. And you mentioned Illinois; they're doing a nice job as well. Really battled Penn State last week, and things didn't obviously work out for Illinois. But this is a really good Penn State. But they have to continue to stack wins together, because Illinois has started out this way, I think a couple of years, maybe 2 years ago, and they were right there in the thick of things. And it might have been 2 or 3 weeks where they could have clinched a chance of being in the Big Ten championship games when we had East and West, but weren't able to close the deal. So it's about them being able to close the deal now and continuing to get better. And really, that's what I think is impressive right now. That middle group of teams, which is much deeper than it has been in previous years, has really been, I think, boding well for this conference. And I really like the way the conference has been shaping up to this point.
Howard, we'll let you go after this. Has it gotten normal to do a Big Ten show and be talking about UCLA, Oregon, USC, Washington yet?
No, no, not at all. I'm going to tell you what is normal, though, for me, is that I get out of the studio in the middle of the day, because there was a time when Coach DiNardo and I would be in the studio all day, and it was like a 16-hour day. Now there's some times where, I think 2 weeks ago, they didn't get out of the studio till like 3 o'clock in the morning. And Marcel, he might spend 20 minutes in the studio and he heads right back to O'Hare to hop on a plane. And that's how close it is for him, where it doesn't even make sense to go back to the hotel. But it's been fun. I think it's really, to me, one of the things that really jumps out this year, and specifically for the Big Ten, is just how many teams and how many fan bases really are still engaged to this point in the season. And even if you go outside of it and you see all the upsets that went on last week, this is just a fun time for college football, for all the issues that are still out there, whether it's NIL and some of those different things, the transfer portal. I think at the end of the day, these teams and having these fan bases and the potential, not the potential, but the fact that they're going to be playoff games on campus, man, the season is going fast, but I can't wait to see some of those matchups that end up happening. And when we start to talk about the true rankings that will be coming out each week, that'll be fun to see as well.
You're spot on, Howard. Like you said, there's been a lot of drama up to this point, but now that the games are going on, you're seeing it play out. It's been so much fun so far. Really do appreciate the time here. This has been tremendous insight, a lot of fun conversation, great build-up leading up to week number 7. Thanks so much and enjoy the games.
All right, guys, take care and enjoy the games yourselves. Take care. See you.
Ryan, we need to get into Penn State at USC, but just a real quick reaction. I thought Howard's comments on the depth of the league, and that's something you and I have kind of looked at, those middle tier teams. The depth of the league has been as big of a surprise that Indiana has been individually. The depth of the league, Washington, right? There's times this year where we had them in our bottom 4, bottom 5 of our power rankings. Illinois, Rutgers, Nebraska. Those are all quality opponents. Iowa. And like when I went on the little rant at the beginning saying, hey, give Ohio State a little credit for beating Iowa. That's a testament to what I think is the strength of the league this year, with the exception of 3-4 teams. The Big Ten 1 through 13, 1 through 14 is a much more competitive conference, and there's more parity outside of the Big Three, and we'll see what happens this weekend. But outside of the Big Three, the competitiveness, for as much talent as a USC and Michigan have on their roster, never did I expect, and Howard mentioned Minnesota, never did I expect Minnesota to be able to go toe-to-toe with just the overall talent that USC had.
You're right, and I think like when you look at the landscape of college football, everybody always talks about the SEC being the best team in college or the best conference in college football. And I think one of the reasons people widely agree to that is because not only teams at the top, but the teams in the middle. Every week is a grind. Every week is a tough test in the SEC. The Big Ten is this year and going forward, because it doesn't seem like many of these programs are dropping off or going anywhere anytime soon. the Big Ten's going to be right there, where it's going to be a gauntlet almost every single week.
See, I've always thought kind of the opposite with the SEC, where the top is so good, but then you've had teams, and I know there's a bad week to bring up this example, but like a Vanderbilt, like in Arkansas, like there's always been teams that have been bottom of the barrel that you're not going to get pushed. But in the Big Ten, and I think it has to do with the history of the conference, the blue collar, the size, like you still have to win in the trenches, no matter how good or bad Illinois may be, or no matter how good or bad Minnesota may be. Like because of the history and tradition of the conference, I always felt like the Big Ten's bottom tier teams, you still had to show up and play a physical game against, where the SEC can just spread them out and go all over the place. Maybe that's changing with what we saw last week in college football, but I disagree, where I always felt like the Big Ten week to week was a little bit tougher. And part of it might be the history, tradition, and pageantry, whereas that wasn't the case in the SEC. So it was interesting to watch last week unfold the way it did because of that also.
And I think now when you look at this other big matchup in the Big Ten this week, it kind of rings true because USC, look, they're scuffling. They've lost 2 out of 3. This is still a really tough challenge here for Penn State to win this game.
USC is a overturned call, or they're an overturn. It's so funny how the complexion of this matchup changes, right? Penn State on the road, unranked USC. They're an overturned call against Minnesota. They're a stop against Michigan away. This is still a team that very easily could be a top 10 football team going into this, and all of a sudden the complexion and the discussion going in is different. So this is still a really, really good USC team that's playing at home. And if you look at the line, I think it's like 4.5 points. Number 4 is only a 4.5 point favorite against an unranked team. That tells you what everyone thinks of USC outside of what their record and ranking is.
You're 100% right about that. We got Howard's thoughts on the game in terms of you asked about the trenches here. Is that as simple? Is it Penn State's? I guess when you talk about trenches here, what is the bigger key? Is it Penn State's rush offense versus USC's rush defense, or is it vice versa here? Penn State's defensive line taking on USC's offensive line, which is a bigger key to this game, you think?
I think both are keys, just because I think Penn State's the better team up front offensively and defensively right now. So I think Penn State's ability to run the football, and we saw what teams have done to USC running the football this year. They're 87th in rush defense. They lost to Michigan and Minnesota and gave up 483 total rushing yards in those 2 games. Penn State gets Nicholas Singleton back. I don't see, with the way Penn State, number one, their backs, but the way their offensive line is playing right now. I know like Vanga Ioane has gone viral because of the pulling that he's done when he's not lined up at guard and he's lined up as kind of that flanker on the outside. But Penn State's playing an incredibly physical brand of football, and that's what's impressed me with Penn State this year. Head to head against Illinois, they out physicaled Illinois. Like that's not something that we've seen. This is as physical a football team that James Franklin has had, and that's a testament to him and what their identity is offensively right now. Even with all the creativity of Andy Kotelnicki, is they lost a first round tackle in Olu Fashanu to the New York Jets. Caden Wallace, just like they've lost some really good players the last couple of years that have gone on to have NFL success at the offensive line. And I think this is their most complete, deepest offensive line yet under James Franklin. So I think it's Penn State, both offensively and defensively, in the trenches. If they can dominate there, USC really doesn't have a chance. And then if they're dominating in the trenches, the whole thing is that Penn State secondary keeping plays in front. Like if you're not giving up 40, 50, 60-yard plays, USC is not going to be able to drive the ball the entire field because of what Penn State's going to be able to do in the trenches. So Penn State winning at the offensive line and defensive line, running the ball, getting pressure on Miller Moss, and then preventing the big plays in the secondary. As you talk about Oregon, Ohio State, okay, what's the separator? This game is pretty easy. If Penn State can stop the explosive plays and win in the trenches, Penn State wins the game. They are the better team. Now, my favorite thing, right? There's a path to success for USC. There's a formula here, but Penn State's the better team, and you can clearly point to, okay, bang, 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 this is how they win the game.
And you talk about physicality. I agree with you. I think Penn State they have perfected the balance of like skill, finesse, and also
Yep.
physicality. They can beat you both ways. They have so far are doing that, whatever kind of how the game script does call. But you look at USC when it comes to physicality, tremendous, I would say, upset with how physical they were against LSU in week number 1 here, slowing down that run game and really going punch for punch with the Tigers team that talked openly about going to that game, wanted to run the ball down their throat and be physical. Mm-hmm. But since that game, we have seen USC really struggle when it comes to physicality, both against Michigan and then Minnesota, where you look at those 2 games, the 2 losses they had, they've allowed combined 483 rushing yards in those 2 losses. You look at Penn State, like you said, Nick Singleton should be back, Kaytron Allen. That run game is one of the best in the country. But also, too, on the other side, I think what's really interesting, Tripp, you talked about Penn State's defense. You know, the defensive line dominating the offensive line, the secondary keeping things in front of you. One thing that's going to be really interesting here is USC, right? They pass the ball a ton. They've had 134 pass attempts the last 3 games. It's an average of 44 per game. They're going to throw the ball, or at least try to, all over the yard. And one thing with Penn State, they got a ton of sacks last year. And that was their big thing to get after the quarterback. This year, only 13 sacks in 5 games. And I think one of the reasons for that is you saw a lot of teams, whether it was early in the year, Illinois, they try to get the ball out quick. Get the ball, quick slant, get it out. That's not really, like, USC is going to try to push the ball down the field. And I think this can be the first game here where USC's defensive line, or Penn State's defensive line, is going to have the time to be able to get home. This feels like they can get to Miller Moss 3, 4, 5 times.
I feel like Penn State, too, the reason they haven't gotten those sack numbers is last year they played with the lead. They've gotten off to some really slow starts. Like, Penn State has to get off to a faster start in this game. They're leaving a day early. They're going to be out there. They're going to be acclimated despite the 2-hour bus ride to Harrisburg and then the flight all the way across country. They have to get off to a fast start because when they play with a lead, that is when that defensive line can really pin its ears back and get after a team throwing the football and needing to throw the football downfield. UCLA, slow start. Defensive line didn't impact the game until later in the game. Illinois, slow start. Defensive line didn't rack up the numbers until later in the game. Howard talked about it. I talked about it. Zane Durant up the middle because of his leverage and what he's doing explosive from the defensive tackle position could make this an absolute nightmare for Miller Moss. And if he has pressure at his feet and he's not getting the ball out quickly, it's going to make it a really long day, and you're going to see those turnovers again from USC's offense. And I think USC has to play a complete and near perfect game to have a chance against Penn State. This will be the greatest challenge for Penn State's secondary in terms of the depth of USC wide receivers. Jalen Kimber, AJ Harris, Cam Miller have played well. This is where you could see the loss of KJ Winston for the first time. Reed and Wheatley have played well. But if Penn State's going to be running that third safety out there, what is Tom Allen's defense going to look like? It's a defense that has also started slow, but has made adjustments. They haven't allowed a point in the third quarter all year. So I could see this being close early. I could see USC making some plays. Big aspect for USC's offense, tight end Lake McCree should come back. And he had 12 receptions before his injury against Michigan. That should help Miller Moss. It should. But I just don't think USC has enough to sustain it the entire game with what Penn State is so balanced. And they can beat you throwing the ball, running the ball. They can get after the quarterback. They can stop the run. I think Penn State's too balanced for USC for 60 minutes to be able to beat a team like this coming into their house.
One thing I don't know. I don't have the answer to. I'm not sure even if you do as well, but I think it's interesting. Like you said about the slow starts, it does remind me a lot this Penn State team of 2016, the one that won the Big Ten title game, because that was very similar, where they would get off to slow starts in the first half, and then all of a sudden the second half, turn it around offensively and defensively. We're seeing that a lot so far this year. It's not a secret. James Franklin's talked about it. The players have talked about it. Is there one underlying factor, one common denominator as to why Penn State has felt like they routinely come out slow? And is there a way to make sure that doesn't happen, especially when you're going, making a long cross-country road trip? Your runway's not long enough, so you got to go to a different airport here as well. Like, is there anything that Penn State can do, like, to actually try to combat here to make sure that this first half they're not getting off slow like they have in previous weeks?
Can I address that for a minute? That is it. The runway
runway?
thing is it's a real thing. All right. It is not, first of all, for all the people on social media, the Harrisburg, by the time you get on the buses, drive to Harris, it is a 2-hour trip to Harrisburg, then a 5-hour cross country trip, then get off the buses at LAX, and then go to your hotel. Like, it is a 9-hour, 10-hour travel day. So, not having a long enough runway, 15 minutes from your facility, okay, it is a real thing. So, for all the people, James Franklin, this is the expectation of major college football. And what he's doing is he's in a position where he can advocate for something, as he's done with all of his facilities. He's advocating for something for his university. They've done it with getting transfers in here. They've done, like, there's a couple of different areas where he's in a position to do that. And I know there's some people that are saying a spoiled head football coach is an excuse. It is a real thing that they have to deal with being in central Pennsylvania that USC and UCLA don't have to deal with. LAX is right there. Columbus, airport's 20 minutes from their campus. And I have traveled with not just football, but other teams to all of these schools. And it is an actual problem. It is. Now, no one's going to care at the end of the day if you win or lose, where your airport is or what the travel circumstances are. But James Franklin's right. He's right in bringing this up. So that's my piece on credit. That.
Like, to his credit, he looks at literally everything. Is the grass an inch too long? Is that going to hurt us? We're going to cut it. Like that. That's a run. I truly, Tripp, would have never envisioned in my life. We are talking about a runway length, maybe impact.
and here's the whole thing. Everyone's like, oh, what? We're flying back into State College. So we'll fly back into State College Saturday night. We'll get back like 2 or 3 in the morning. No biggie. Like that's normal for late games or cross-country trips. But the plane can land here fine because it's taking off. The runway's too short because of the weight of the fuel. So it would have no problem. And a normal plane that you take, and I'm not sure what we might, like when we went to the Rose Bowl, we took a bigger plane out of Harrisburg. I don't know what we're taking, but the plane, your usual like 737 that we fly on can take off, or 747 can take off from here when you're going to Columbus or you're going to Chicago, because you don't need as much fuel. But the fuel required to go all the way across the country weighs the plane down too much, that the runway length is too short to elevate the plane and get it off the ground, where if you wanted to use that plane to fly out of here, you'd have to stop for fuel somewhere along the way. So, like, that's the problem here.
I can promise you this. Sure.
Can I get back to talking about, like, USC's offensive line allowing 22 pressures against Michigan, and Mason Murphy struggling at right tackle and Elijah Page at left tackle, and not the dang runway?
Well, I promise you that if USC wins and Penn State loses, Sunday morning, James Franklin will be out there digging to himself to expand that runway. I think that project will get done ASAP here if the Trojans do win. I can promise you that. But you are right. Like, and that's why I brought up the pass attempts for Miller Moss, and thank you for really kind of coloring that in. USC throws the ball a lot, and they have recently struggled to keep Miller Moss upright. That's led to turnovers, by the way, something we haven't even talked about at this point. They've turned the ball over 8 times in the last 3 games. That is very problematic so far.
Which Penn State does not do. Penn State does. Drew Aller does not turn the football over. They do not fumble the football, and they cleaned up their penalties last week. Like, everything is pointing Penn State's direction. But to Howard's point, USC needs this. Like, they have 2 big losses already. They're at home. They are still, again, flipping one of those plays. It's a top 10 matchup if you flip one of those results. So they have the talent and caliber of a top 10, top 15, top 20 team, even though they may not be ranked there. But everything points that Penn State should win the game.
There's a path. Tripp always finds a path. The path to victory. Let's take a trip. Let's do this. Let's take a trip to picks here. All right, we talked about what should happen, what we think will happen. Well, let's actually talk about here some of the games. Let's save the 2 big games for last year, since we talked a lot about them so far. And let's talk about a few other games around the conference here. We have 7 conference games. Friday night, Northwestern at Maryland. Maryland at home, 10-point favorite here. Tripp's going to win here, Tripp?
Yeah, I think they just have too many playmakers. Like, I think Northwestern hasn't been good, but they've been competitive. Even gave Indiana a bit of a game early last week.
They did.
So I could see the Wildcats finding a way. But I think Maryland is ultimately too many playmakers. I think Felton and Edwards have too big of a game, and I don't think Northwestern has the scoring to keep up. So give me Maryland in like a 35-24 type game.
I actually like this game going a lot like how last week's Indiana-Northwestern game went, because I do think Maryland and Indiana's offense are similar. They can put up a lot of yards and points here. Billy Edwards Jr. has been tremendous. The receivers have been great, like you said. And Northwestern's offense last week finally showed a sign of life. So I think that can continue here, but not enough to keep up with Maryland's high-powered offense. I think kind of like last week when Indiana pulled away in the fourth quarter, we see that from Maryland here. Should be a good atmosphere in College Park on a Friday night. Give me Maryland -10. I like 35-24. I like that, right around that range, 38-24, somewhere in that range. Maryland wins and covers. High noon, Saturday, Big Ten Network. Rutgers, 2.5-point favorites at home against Wisconsin. Wisconsin coming off just an absolute beatdown they laid here on Purdue. Trip. Does that carry over here, or does Rutgers kind of slow them down a little bit and bounce back after a rough game in Lincoln last week?
The thing is, Rutgers is never going to play a game that's not a one-score game. So any game they play could go anyway. It could go either way. I was really impressed with what we saw from Wisconsin, but Rutgers at home, I think they're still a really good team, and I think this time they find a way inside Wisconsin territory to convert, like they didn't last weekend against Nebraska. I like Rutgers, but you know it's gonna be really, really close. You just do.
The calamity of errors that happened last week for the Scarlet Knights, I don't think it will happen again here. I like Rutgers 10-point victory at home. I think they kind of go back to Kaminunga. I thought that was one thing they got away from him too early last week. I think they get back to him, kind of run the ball more consistently, and then ask Calvin McManus after that to throw the football, not kind of the other way around. Rutgers at home, I think, does win here and does cover. Big noon kickoff trip. Iowa hosting Washington. Another early body clock game here, or early body clock game for Washington. Iowa at home, 2.5-point favorites.
Yeah, I like Washington. I think Eli Rogers is throwing the ball really well, a little bit one-dimensional offensively, but Jed Fish has brought that physicality to the Washington defense. They have an identity on the defensive side. I like Washington to go on the road and win at Iowa.
Will Rogers has played really well. I don't want to do it. I'm going to take Iowa. I think this is one of those
Such a tough
games,
place to play.
Very tough place to play. Early body clock game for the Huskies as well. You're going halfway across the country at least, but that's going to be 11 a.m. local kick for them. You know, it's going to feel like 9 a.m. I do think Iowa bounces back here and just plays Iowa football enough to win a really low scoring. Give me the under in this game, whatever it is. I think Iowa wins and covers. Say like a 3-point game, so barely covers, but I think Iowa does pull it out here and get the victory. One of the few, or one of the only, I should say, ranked teams playing that's not in the big two games that we've discovered already. Number 23, Illinois, hosting Purdue. 3:30 on FS1. Tripp, the Illini at home, 19-point favorites here.
Yep.
Can Purdue... Can Ryan Walters keep this competitive against his former school?
Nope.
Yeah, I agree. Unfortunately, I agree. I think the down year for Purdue continues. Offensively, they're brutal. Defensively, they're brutal. Illinois, I think that's a good week off for them after that tough game against Penn State. Kind of reset, and they come out at home strong. Yeah, I think this is maybe not the caliber of beatdown that Wisconsin gave them last week. Was that 52-6? May not get that ugly, but 41-10.
Illinois has the chance to with Altmaier playing the way he's played and those receivers. They have a chance to. Yeah, this could be bad.
Purdue staying there at the bottom. Minnesota going to LA. They are taking on UCLA. 5-point favorites on the road. 9:00 Eastern kick on Big Ten Network here. Golden Gophers. Is this a letdown spot for them after last week? Or can they keep the momentum rolling, Trip, here and beat UCLA for another win?
I think UCLA showed some positives offensively, moving the ball against Penn State and not making the big mistakes they made throughout the first couple of weeks of the season. That said, their only touchdown came in garbage time at the end in what was a 27-3 game, and Penn State in clock protection mode as UCLA uncharacteristically ran the clock off. I think Minnesota's the better team because they have to go to UCLA. It's probably a tight game, but I think Minnesota wins it at the Rose Bowl.
I think they win it as well. I think going on the road here can kind of help lock you in, focus in. But
Yeah.
Minnesota's been a tough team this year. It's not like they've been rolled over in some of the losses. I like the Golden Gophers here on the road to win and cover as well. 5.5 or 5 point spread here. I think they do win in UCLA, kind of along with Purdue here. Better, but still kind of at the bottom of the conference here. All right.
Yeah.
Game you're calling here. Number 4, Penn State. The last line I saw, at least as we're recording this on Wednesday, so it could change by the time you're listening to it, but it shouldn't change that much. Penn State 5.5-point road favorites at USC, 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 local kick in LA on CBS. Tripp, we said Penn State should win. The big question, will they win?
Yeah, I think they win it pretty easy. I really do. I think they're the better team up front. They've been so good in the trenches. They've played mostly mistake-free football. The receivers, Liam Clifford had a big game last week. Harrison Walls had a big game week 1. Julian Fleming has done a lot of good things. Tyler Warren's the best tight end in college football right now. They've got a good defense. Yeah, I can see it being tight early, but I see Penn State winning and covering pretty easily here. I think Penn State's right there with Ohio State and Oregon. This is a very complete Penn State football team. I think they rise to the occasion and take care of business on the road in Southern California. And I think going Thursday and flying out of Harrisburg and on that longer runway, they'll take care of it.
My only question is, I agree. I think Penn State wins. I think the only question is I think they win convincingly at the end. My only question is, when do they pull away? I think it will be close again in the first half, just because to this point, Penn State's not showed the ability early on, both offensively and defensively, to swing first and then kind of get out of there. I think it could be one score game going into halftime. Then, as we've seen Penn State in the third quarter really especially dominate and then pull away, I think they win by 3 touchdowns. But I think how they get there, it's a slow burn where it's close at halftime, then they pull away in the second half. Do you expect kind of the first hot start for the Nittany Lions in this game?
It's bound to happen at some point, but yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen anything that tells me, yeah, I should expect that. But I think what you just outlined, that's how I also see the game going. But it's got to happen at some point, right? Maybe
It does. And wouldn't it be so college football you're going long travel, early local kickoff? Wouldn't it just make so much sense that they got off to a slow start? You think, of course they're going to have to get off to a slow start here. And they just come out guns a-blazing and score 2 touchdowns immediately. That would be very college football for you. Unpredictable. The last one here, Tripp. The big one we talked a lot about. Number 2, Ohio State. Number 3, Oregon. 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 local. NBC has the game. Buckeyes, 3-point road favorites. Brian Tripp. Will Ohio State win? Will they cover? Or is Oregon celebrating here a big victory?
there's something about some Autzen magic and Ohio State going there for the first time that has me really wanting to pick Oregon. But I think Ohio State's loaded. I think they find a way to win it. Yeah, I like Ohio State. I don't. I think there's a little chaos that happens during the game, turnovers, big plays. Um, Ohio State's got something to prove. They've been locked in all year. Ultimately, I think it ends up being a double-digit victory for the Buckeyes.
You know what's funny? We agree on a lot here. I had a 10-point victory in my head. I think they win and cover, and I think they win by double digits. I like the way they're playing. I think there's right now clicking in all cylinders more than Oregon is. And I think the Ducks, this was the game where I really thought Ohio State was going to lose and Oregon was going to win. But with what I've seen so far, I can't pick against Ohio State. I can't.
If our predictions play out, you know what we're talking about on November 2nd.
Let me ask you this. Is it number 1 versus number 2?
Yeah, I think so.
Wowza.
As a college football fan, I kind of, and obviously with our allegiances, which I think we do a pretty good job of not being biased here, but with our allegiances and as a college football fan, what more would you want? What more would you want?
Would be,
in a way, I'm kind of rooting for that.
That would be so much fun. Early November, 1 versus 2 matchup here. Oh,
long way to go. Long way to go before we get there. I was
going to say, you are the one who never puts the cart before the horse. Holy smokes, here you are looking a month ahead.
but peering into my crystal ball, right? Like that would be sick.
That would be insane for sure. But before we get there, right, we got to get this week. And that will be a great one in Austin Stadium for sure. Number 2 versus number 3. All right. Really do appreciate you tuning in again. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts on YouTube. Big thank you to Howard Griffith, who did a tremendous job breaking it down here.
If you're not watching on YouTube, you should, because you got like all these cool graphics we made now. I mean, it looks good. We look
Tripp and
great.
I are matching,
Like,
wearing black shirts as well, so you can see us twinning. Minus the hair.
yeah, this is for the Phillies funeral.
Oh!
This,
You said it, not me.
that was fun. That was fun. Let's do it again sometime.
You know what? Let's do it again Monday. After these games, we'll be here to break it all down. Enjoy it. Have a great week 7. We'll be back with you on Monday right now to break it all down. Where else but right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.